This episode of the No Huddle Show is being brought to you by Chevrolet Cadillac of Turnersville, a Penske automotive dealer. Visit today at the Route 42 location in Turnersville, New Jersey, or online at ChevroletofTurnersville.com and CadillacofTurnersville.com. What's going on, everybody? Zack Rosenblatt here with Mike Kaye, NJ.com. We're here with the latest episode of the No Huddle Show. We're at Jerry World, AT&T Stadium in Dallas, Texas. The Eagles' playoff hopes, they're not evaporated, but they might as well be. They lost, if you didn't get my drift.
Yeah, this is a weird one because, we'll get into the performances later, but again, you can look at Carson Wentz's stat line, and if you didn't watch the game, you would think he had an incredible game. You would think the offense had a great game. You would also think that this was a lot closer than it probably should have been. Man, for the defense to get 3 turnovers, finally, a multi-turnover game, win the turnover battle by 2 turnovers, for Carson Wentz to score 3 touchdowns, and for the Eagles to lose in overtime and only score 23 points. Jiminy Crickets.
Crickets.
After the game, I talked to Brandon Graham, and I asked him, if I told you that you guys were going to have 3 turnovers and win the turnover battle by 2, would you have ever thought you guys would be losing a game in overtime? He was like, nah, not really. It was one of those, man. Cameron Johnson punted 6 times. 6 times.
Wow, I wonder... We should have put odds on the first mention of Cameron Johnson from you. That was the earliest of the season.
He was busy. The bro was busy. And he actually punted pretty well. He had a 46.
All right, let's talk about Cameron Johnson for the next 20 minutes.
Anyway, you get what I'm saying.
Yeah,
he's going to happen.
Just look at the play disparity. The Cowboys threw it 54 times, ran it 36 times. The Eagles threw it 32 times, mostly in the fourth quarter, and they ran it 14 times. Like that. That's why. Like the defense was out there for a while, and the offense would get the ball and they wouldn't do anything with it. The first quarter they didn't score again. Carson Wentz lost a fumble. It was his 32nd of his career. He's only played 40 games. Like he hasn't lost all those fumbles, but you can't be putting the ball on the ground that much. Like that's not an anomaly. That's a problem.
He had Darren Sproles wide open to his right too.
Yeah, but overall, before we just do you declare the Eagles season dead?
No, but it is on hardcore life support. It needs CPR, an ADT. Somebody needs to call for 911. This is really, there's barely a pulse here.
I say it's over.
The only reason why I don't say it's over is because of how resilient they were last season. I know it's a different team.
This is it's going to be week 15, and they've shown nothing.
The Rams are the only team that looks like unbeatable, and crazier stuff's happened in this. And their season, the NFC East Division title hopes are done. They're dead. Those are dead. They've got an outside shot of making the playoffs. I'm not really an optimistic guy, but this season it's so hard to tell what's going to happen.
It's not. They lose to good teams. It's not that hard to figure out. They do lose to
good teams. That's true. But most of these games, you're like, you know what? Here. Let's just get into it from the jump.
Yeah.
The opening kickoff fumble. Can we please talk about that? Because that is the thing.
They didn't lose the game because of that, but that certainly did not help. That would have changed everything. Just everything that went into it. Camus Grugier-Hill all week was like the storyline because he said the Cowboys choke all the time, and he's the one who did he force the fumble? He only recovered it, right?
Malcolm Jenkins.
He recovered it. He pretty clearly came up with it in the pile, came out with it out of the pile, and they were like,
well, and even if he didn't clearly come out with it, Leroy Reynolds did a Kegel exercise on the ball.
Yeah. There was no Cowboys near it.
No one.
It was amazing. So the ref's explanation was they didn't see clear enough evidence that the Eagles came up with the ball.
How much clear evidence? Do you need?
What does that mean? That was the official explanation afterwards to the pool reporter. And Malcolm Jenkins had a he's going to get fined 100%.
A lot of money.
He said whoever is in New York and made that call needs to get off the bottle. It was a paraphrase of what he said.
No, that's not even a paraphrase.
Was that exactly what he said?
Yeah, that's exactly what he said.
That's a great quote. It's going to hit his checkbook. He makes a good amount of money. He'll be fine with it, I guess. But
I don't think he cared, to be honest with you.
But it was a ridiculous call. It's one of those small things that it's it changes everything. Like a turnover on the first play, that's crazy. But I mean, they forced 3 turnovers, and what did they score? They scored the 1 touchdown because they were at the 2-yard line where Carson Wentz threw it to Alshon Jeffrey.
They did end up scoring a touchdown on that next drive, but that next drive on the next turnover. So you're talking about Corey Graham returns the interception to the 2-yard line. They throw a 2-yard touchdown pass on a screen to Alshon Jeffrey. Then after that, there was a forced fumble by Michael Bennett, who was
in the third quarter, by the way.
In the third quarter, who's been absolutely unreal.
I mean, let me get. We'll talk about him more,
yeah,
but just his numbers. He had 5 quarterback hits, 2 tackles for losses, and 1.5 sacks. We'll talk about him later. But
and forced a fumble.
And forced a fumble
that Brandon Graham picked up. Now
that was huge.
It was huge. Initially, the Eagles were able to throw a touchdown pass to Dallas Goedert.
Yeah, 75 yards, something like that.
Yeah.
They called an OPI.
They called an OPI. I don't know.
That was bad. Dallas Goedert said he didn't even know there was a flag. Like, he just ran, and then he's like, wait, what? And everybody had to go all the way back. They ended up scoring at the end of that drive still.
Oh, no, that was sorry.
Was that after Brandon Graham?
That was the fourth. That was the answer to the 75-yard touchdown.
From Amari Cooper, yeah. Which might as well have been a turnover.
Right. I mean,
no, I'm just kidding.
Look, those 2 calls, the OPI and the initial opening kickoff, might be 2 of the top 10 worst calls I've ever seen in an NFL game. Definitely that I've covered.
But so after the fumble, this was the drive where they were in the red zone. They got to the 8-yard line. At one point, they gave Wendell Smallwood the ball for some reason.
Oh, right, yeah.
Corey Clement hurt his knee. I'd be pretty surprised if he played again this season. He pretty immediately went to the locker room, came back out in street clothes and a knee brace. That's a big loss. So Wendell Smallwood was their choice. It's Darren Sproles, who was running the ball really well. They gave Wendell Smallwood the ball on 2nd down. Then Wentz had a bad pass attempt for Zach Ertz. It was nowhere near him. So they settled for a field goal.
Yeah, that was the
I mean, we haven't talked as much about, like, because there's been, like, such obvious things that they needed to do better, but this game there's, like, so many little things that happened that kind of led to the ending, and one of them is Jake Elliott missing an extra point.
Yeah, that came out back to bite. I tweeted right after that was going to come back to bite them, and it ended up doing. Every point matters in a close game.
Yeah, so that kind of ties into another storyline that came towards the end of the game, where the Eagles tied the game, or they scored a touchdown, they were down by 1, they made the extra point, Dallas was called for a penalty, so the Eagles could have accepted and moved up to the 1-yard line. Doug Peterson in 2017, I mean, he probably goes for 2, right?
Sure, yeah.
And he decided to play it safe, go for the points. I mean, what did you think about that call?
I think if he has Corey Clement, he goes for that.
Yeah, because that's his goal line guy?
Yeah, I mean...
Because Wentz clearly is not an option running the ball anymore. Yeah, at least not this season.
I spoke to Josh Adams, and he ran the ball later in the game, so it wasn't like he was injured or anything. It was just, I think...
He hasn't done as well in those short yardage situations.
Right, and I also think you want the ability to, if you want to pass out of that and check out of it. Yeah, it was a questionable decision. I didn't really understand it. A lot of people in the press box didn't understand it. What was his explanation for it? I missed.
He basically just said he wanted to get the points, and he was confident that they could come back out. And
after Jake Elliott missed an extra point, and you're surging, and for some reason,
don't kill the messenger, you know?
No, I mean, I know. For some reason, like, I thought his play calling was pretty unimaginative during the game.
For the first 3 quarters, especially.
Yeah, it was lethargic.
It was all
play calling.
I mean, Golden Tate. How much storyline was that? We talked about this last week. They're finally figuring out how to use him. He had 3 targets, 1 catch. Like, he was non-factor, completely non-factor.
Alshon Jeffrey, who said that he had the best hands in the league, had 2 really bad drops.
Yes, he did. And, I mean, the 2 guys that were their best players on offense were Zach Ertz and Dallas Goedert, probably.
Dallas Goedert's
that dude's legit, man. It just underscores the fact that that's another guy they just haven't used this season, and that 12 personnel works when they use it.
He's going to be special.
I tweeted this. I think he might be, in terms of talent, already one of the. There's not that many good tight ends anymore, but he might be one of the top 10 most talented tight ends in the NFL.
Sure,
and he almost would have been a better addition to this offense than Golden Tate, because they should have just started using him more and used that as the boost they needed, because he can get yards after the catch. He doesn't really drop anything. He's become a pretty good blocker. And what's Golden Tate bringing you? They're not even playing him all the snaps.
Yeah, it's like they didn't have a plan.
He did score a touch. He scored. So he had that called back, and then they went up the field again, and he scored still.
Yeah. No, that was earlier in the game.
Oh, that was earlier. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, there's so much stuff that happened.
I know, that's the thing. It's like so many things.
We're going to get killed in the comments. That's fine.
Well, that's the fun. Like, all this stuff happened the first 3 quarters. and it was a boring game, and the fourth quarter was the most exciting football we've seen all season.
Yeah, for sure.
Like, the Eagles were going up the field on offense. They were giving up some big plays to Amari Cooper, I guess you could say.
Let's say this, too. We'll go through the individual positions later, but we were wrong about Darren Sproles. We were clearly wrong about Darren Sproles.
Yeah, we'll take the L on that one.
Darren Sproles has been fantastic.
He looks really good. I mean, the touchdown he scored, it was on a catch.
Right, yeah.
He did most of the work. I mean, it was pretty much at the line of scrimmage, and he powered through another guy. This is a 5'6", 35-year-old who barely played this season, and I mean, he should have been the goal line option.
Probably.
Like, I think he's their best goal line back. I think there's a stat that he's been one of the better ones in the NFL over the course of his career, sneakily, because you don't expect that out of a little guy, but he has, like, the leverage, and he's smart. But, I mean, what were his touches today? I'm curious.
He had 1 carry for 2 yards, and then he had 3 catches. He had 3 targets and 3 catches for for 34 yards
and a touchdown. He's about to have a much bigger role these last few weeks.
Well, yeah, clearly with Corey Clement.
Unless it's not as bad as it looked, but it looked pretty bad.
It looked pretty bad.
And speaking of injuries, let's touch on one. Sidney Jones left the game because of a hamstring thing. This dude can't finish games. He did last week. He went back into the game, clearly was affected either by the hamstring injury or just wasn't prepared to go back in. They took him back out. Doug indicated that they were a little concerned, so they pulled him back out. Maybe he shouldn't have went back in the game in the first place. I mean, when he got pulled out, Devontae Bosby went in and didn't do the best. But, I mean, you shouldn't be expecting Bosby to stop Amari Cooper is the reality. But,
I mean, maybe you're using injuries as an excuse because he was beat pretty plainly on that 28-yard touchdown, and that's when they took him out, and then Bosby stopped for some reason in coverage. It looked like he actually had pretty good coverage.
That was really
and
bad.
He got beat. These injuries are really hard to overcome. I'm going to talk about them a little bit more later. Rasul Douglas played the game of his life, and the only thing that anybody's going to come away with it is how he bouted the ball, and Cooper caught the touchdown. I talked to him after the game, and Rasul basically was like, that interception wasn't a big play because we didn't end up scoring off of it. We didn't he's a guy that wants to win over stats, which sometimes seems weird for like a ball hawking corner, but yeah, man, he was distraught after the game, and I don't blame him. He made a huge play on the ball. The problem is gravity said "F you," and it went straight.
I mean, that was just a microcosm of like their season. Like that wasn't happening last year. I mean, his teammates pulled him aside. They were all obviously very. This team, for what it's worth, like the locker room has stayed together. I know they've had some guys maybe complaining a little bit about their roles, but it kind of goes away. The Camus Grugier Hill thing comes, it went away pretty quick. Like the team kind of passed it off
as
like
an 8-8 team. You know what I mean? Like you're not bad enough that we should blow everything up. You're not good enough that we should be feeling ourselves. This is an 8-8 team. You know what I mean? Like
I have them going 7-9, but yes, your point being they're an average team.
I think they could beat the Texans. I think that's
they can. I don't think they will.
Yes. I mean, I do think they're going to beat the bricks off the Redskins, but that's really not anybody's time.
That will be one of those # moral victories.
People will be like, I'm just planning my New Year's Eve vacation early. But let's go player by position by position.
Yeah, no, let's go play each player on the entire roster. Jordan Mailata, go.
All right, let's talk about Carson Wentz.
Yeah. So the first 3 quarters he was bad.
He was bad. Yes,
like
he was bad.
He was inaccurate. He was holding onto the ball too long. The inaccuracy is a thing that's kind of been an underlying theme this season. It hasn't been as talked about maybe as much.
Yeah, because he's completing 69% of his passes on paper.
Accuracy is different than this. Like Eli Manning throws a high percentage. That he's not an accurate quarterback. Like I don't know. There's just some of these throws where like he's either miscommunicating with the receiver. Like there was one with Golden Tate early in the game where he was just completely off. He probably would have hit him if this was last year. I don't know if he's in his head. I don't know if it's knee. Like
he's not stepping up properly.
He doesn't look fast. Like when he's running the ball, they ran one design, or it was an option run on, what was that, it was 3rd down, I believe, and he like went out to the right, and he was going nowhere with that. Like I don't know what something about him, man. There's been games where he's shown some flashes, but it's never been for 4 quarters. It's never been for 3 quarters. He's usually been for a half or a quarter at a time. And the 4th quarter, he was pretty good. He had a really good throw to Nelson Aguilar down the sideline. He only turned the ball over once on that fumble. The fumbles are an issue that we talked about. He doesn't really throw that many interceptions, which is good. But, I mean, it might as well be a turnover if you're going 3 and out.
I think the issue for them is not his lack of completions.
Yeah.
It's when the incompletions come and when
and how they look.
Right, and some of his decision making has not been great. I don't think he has been finding a rhythm as easily as the stats show. Look, Carson Wentz is still a top 10 quarterback in this league. I'm not killing him. I'm just saying there's something that's not there that was there prior to the ACL injury last year. Now, is it the result of the knee surgeries? I don't know. But he clearly at times is having trouble processing plays or finding open receivers, which is a problem that another quarterback on the Eagles roster had at times during his initial stint in Philadelphia, Nick Foles. I got a lot of tweets. I was really surprised because Carson has a sense of leeway among the fan base, or the majority of the fan base, that very few quarterbacks have been allotted during his time.
Like he has a buffer between when they will criticize him.
Right.
And it seems like it's getting to that point now.
I mean, my Twitter feed was full of Carson's done, Carson just looks lost.
It's funny you say that, because I wrote, my story was about how it was an evaluation of Carson's whole game. I looked at it from all angles, all the good, all the bad. But the gist was that he did not play that well. He didn't come up big in the biggest game of his career to this point. And I think he was outplayed by Dak Prescott. I got a lot of flack for that part of it because Dak Prescott did turn the ball over 3 times. But he was making plays down the field that Wentz wasn't. He was making throws that, I know he had some bad throws, but he also had some really, really good throws. And Wentz only had 1 or 2 of those really, really good throws. Like, the complete body of work, I think you have to say Dak won that matchup.
I think so, yeah.
Maybe it's closer than the numbers might indicate, but Dak had some NFL throws.
It's probably better radio if you and I argue about it, but really, to me, I thought Carson played. You can look at his completion percentage was fine. Like, that's fine. Completion percentage is one of the most overrated stats in the league, especially when you're not. What I look at is scoring drives. That's important. You look at, he led 1 scoring drive in the first 3 quarters, and that scoring drive was manufactured by
a turnover.
The
defense carried the team tonight.
Right. If you, I don't want to compare him to people, but if you gave somebody like Aaron Rodgers 3 turnovers to work with, if you gave somebody like Tom Brady,
they win.
Well, you expect them to win.
Yeah.
Carson, it just kind of seems like he is having difficulty processing plays until later in the game. He's actually become a pretty good adjuster on the fly, I would say, because for there are people out there that say that Carson isn't clutch. Carson's played significantly better in the 3rd and 4th quarter.
I mean, that's why his numbers look like the way they do.
It's not that he's not clutch, because he's not. It's not that he's not clutch, and it's not that he's getting all of his numbers in garbage time, because I don't want that to be I know that's not what you mean. I don't want it to be interpreted that way. He's playing well because they're in games, and he wants to have these comebacks. It's just, it's a little too late. Like, it is. It's not garbage time, but things add up.
Yeah.
He fumbled in Dallas territory. I mean, like, there are too many mistakes that happen throughout the game, whether they're turnovers or misreads or failed attempts to convert on a turnover. And it comes back to bite them, and I don't know what it is, because it only really seems to happen early in games. It's very weird. It's like he's a late rhythm quarterback, which is very weird when you consider the success he had last season.
So, that first half, the Cowboys were moving up and down the field. At halftime, they had 6 points. Jim Schwartz is not the reason why this team is not going to make the playoffs. I mean, I don't know how many ways we could say it. I think maybe people are finally coming around to it. Like, Carson Wentz is a big part of this discussion. The play calling is a big part of this discussion. The offensive line is a big part of this discussion. Although I think they played fairly well outside of a few bad Jason Peters plays that he gave up. But they're being put in the position where Carson Wentz has to battle back in the 4th quarter, because the first 3 quarters they're not doing their job. Carson Wentz is not doing his job. That's just what I mean.
I don't know how you go.
I don't think you can say he's not clutch, but like, I feel like part of the clutch discussion has to be like the entire game. Like if you're not that clutch, if you're putting your team in the position that you have to come back so often.
So part of this too is, and this game's a little skewed because of the time of possession. In the first half, the Eagles had the ball for about 8.5 minutes. The Cowboys had it for like 21 minutes and change. That's a really big differential in time of possession. I overheard somebody asking Josh Adams, "Hey, you had 3 carries for 30 yards in the first half, on the first drive, and then you didn't see the ball till later."
Because they
didn't have the ball.
I know that. One thing I thought. So Jason Kelsey grabbed him after the game. There was a few of us over there. He mentioned how like defenses are changing what they're doing at the beginning of the games, and they haven't done a good job of adjusting to it. He wasn't taking a shot. He said it's like little things that we're not adjusting to well enough. I don't think he was taking a shot at the coaches, but the reality is that's a preparation thing. Like teams are throwing something at them and they're not ready for it.
Yeah, it's funny because you hear players say, "Hey, they knew what our plays were." Like you listen to the Jaguars against the Titans, and they're like, "Oh, it's very easy." Like they knew it was coming.
And then Derrick Henry just
Yeah, I do wonder if that's the thing, because I thought the defense played incredible tonight, man. You look at the score, it's a little different. I mean,
they wore down at the end. Like that's reasonable.
For
a million plays. They're on the field for literally a million plays.
I mean, it's just one of those things where I just think it was a very one-sided game for 3 quarters, and then it came back to bite them in the fourth. Whether the Eagles' offense was ready to make up for it or not, they really kind of fell by the wayside. And for all the negative here, it is interesting to see that the offense bounced back. They were able to finish drives when they needed to. They just didn't get the ball back in overtime.
Yeah.
That's the thing too, is a lot of people make fun of, like, Nick Foles left the field with the lead against the Saints during that first playoff run, and the people that support him were like, well, he had the lead when he left the game. He didn't get the ball back. The defense let him down. And then there's other people that were like, well, he should have scored enough that the defense didn't have to be put in that position. It's a chicken or the egg sort of thing.
Well, that's the thing. It's the two things haven't worked together all season. Like that's just the reality of it. Like
that's an 8-8 team.
How many halves, even halves, not even games. How many halves have there been where the defense and offense both performed to their capabilities?
Last week and the week before that.
Then the 2 Giants games.
Yeah.
Like that's pretty much it. I mean, maybe there's it's like segments.
East game doesn't involve the Cowboys.
Exactly. All right, let's go on to the running backs.
Yeah.
We touched on them a little bit. Josh Adams, the first 3 carries, he looked fantastic. 3 carries, 30 yards. Had a 24-yard carry, as you mentioned. Didn't see the ball again for a while. Finished 7 of 36. I mean,
still averaged 5 yards per carry.
He still looks like a stud. We were wrong about Sproles. We were right about him.
Let me ask you this: do you feel comfortable not drafting a running back in the first 3 rounds?
And another running back. I don't know how they go about doing it. Whether it's in those first 3 rounds, maybe 4th round, they sign someone, trade for someone. I do think they need to bring someone in. I think Josh Adams needs to be the part of like a tandem. I see Corey Clement as more of like a number 3 guy. I think he can. It depends on how serious his injury is. Maybe he might be out for a year if it's a torn ACL. But yeah, I think they need to bring in like a fast running back, a guy who can get yards and chunks and can like bring something a little bit different than what they have right now. Sproles is obviously going to retire. You would think. I mean, he's amazing. I don't know. We were wrong about him, like we said. But yeah, they need to bring another body in.
Yeah, I think they do. I don't know how you go about doing it. I thought a guy like C.J. Anderson made sense, but he got passed on by the Chiefs and the Eagles clearly, and signed with the Raiders. Maybe it's a guy like Brandon Bolden, who like had a really good game for the Dolphins today. Journeyman running back, like somebody like that.
Yeah, a guy who's not going to cost a lot, but yeah,
right.
I mean, like a guy like Blunt they got last year.
Right, exactly. I think that's part of what they're missing. Or you just re-sign Jay Ajayi, which I don't know.
Or they keep trotting Wendell Smallwood out there because they seem to love him.
Yeah,
but Ajayi is an interesting case. I'm curious to see how that goes. If he's willing to come on a 1-year prove-it deal, I mean, he's kind of a little bit of what they're missing. He's a guy who can go and get those tough yards. He can get the short yards. He's pretty well liked in the locker room. I mean, personality-wise, I know those running backs really like him. So it would be a Jay Ajayi, healthy Corey Clement, and Josh Adams trio. That's interesting. And maybe you draft another guy to develop for the year after that. Let's reel it back to here. Yeah, the tight ends. Zach Ertz. I mean, it wasn't an amazing Zach Ertz game. He was 5 of 8, 38 yards. The ones that missed him weren't his fault. It was Wentz missing him.
Hey, he passed 1,000 yards for the first
Oh,
time in his
I
career.
didn't realize that.
How do you like that? How do you like
I mean,
that?
I think that's an important milestone for him because a lot of these other top tight ends have already done that, and that was kind of the one thing that wasn't on his resume yet. I mean, 10 touchdowns would be the next goal for him, and I think he might get in that direction this year. But he was solid. I mean, he wasn't bad or anything. Goddard, we talked about him. I mean, we've raved about him before, but I think today we're seeing him at his best, and he's only getting better. I think he's going to be a Pro Bowler.
Yeah,
Maybe he won't be here because I don't know if he'll get the touches to get that. 'Cause it's hard to get two tight ends unless you're the Patriots and you have the murdering dude and Gronk. So
I think next year the plan will be to build around the two.
They got to use that 12 personnel a lot.
I think that's the ultimate goal. If you spend that high of a draft pick, plus Zack is the most dependable player on the offense.
Yeah, but receivers.
Okay, so
We
as
talked
I
about
said
this
before,
a little bit.
Alshon Jeffrey had two pretty brutal drops, but he also had a couple of big plays.
He had the touchdown.
He's a guy that a lot of people don't talk about yak with, or they don't think he gets a lot of yak. But he fights for extra yardage. That was very clear in this game. As you mentioned, Golden Tate was kind of a non-factor in this game.
I wonder who won the between those two trade deadline deals. I wonder who won.
Oh boy,
we should talk about Mark. We'll get into that on the cornerbacks.
Yeah,
but yeah, I mean, Jordan Matthews had a catch.
Nelson Aguilar had a pretty nice game. He had 2 catches for 40.
I mean, he's getting yards and he's getting down the field. He also is another guy with an interesting future because he's going to be due to make close to $9 million next year. That's a lot. If he's only getting 2 catches a game, I wonder what they're going to think about his future with the team. He kind of has to show a lot of these next few games, I think.
See, if I were him and I like Philadelphia, I try to work out a long-term extension.
I think it would make sense for both sides to where that cap number goes down.
Kind of like a 5-year...
We're
$35 million deal.
We're the first couple of years are guaranteed or something.
Right, where you know that you're only really going to see 2 years of this pact, and then you can hit free agency.
But he's been solid. He hasn't been amazing. He hasn't been bad. He's been solid.
Yeah, if I were him, I wouldn't want to hit the free agent market either. So signing a short-term extension might make sense.
All right, offensive line. Jason Peters gave up 2 sacks that were pretty bad, where it was okay, we're back to Jason Peters is washed mode. Then you didn't really have as much issues the rest of the game.
Yeah, no.
DeMarcus Lawrence kind of wreaked a little bit of havoc. I mean, the numbers maybe don't say it, but he definitely felt his presence. He had 1 hit. The offensive line as a whole gave up for 5 QB hits, 2 sacks. I mean, that's
another thing that's skewed because they weren't really on the field all that much.
Yeah.
Too. So they're kind of
I mean, you can't really they've been really great in the rushing game, but they didn't really run the ball. So I think you can be okay with that, how the offensive line played it. One of those sacks, like you mentioned, Darren Sproles was open. Wentz probably could have got rid of the ball quicker. Or either the first one or the second one, he could have ran away. But I don't know if he thinks like that anymore.
Right.
Which is another whole other issue. But let's go to the defense. I mean, there's a lot to talk about here, obviously.
So the
defensive line. Michael Bennett, number 1, Fletcher Cox, number 2. And then, Brandon Graham was pretty good, too. He forced a lot of holding calls. He didn't really show up in the stat sheet. But those 2 guys, Michael Bennett especially, man, we talk about him every week. He's nearing the point where you can make a case that he's their defensive MVP.
Oh, I don't think there's a question that he's their defensive MVP. Sorry, Fletcher Cox, but when you really look at
it's between him, Malcolm, and Fletcher would be the 3 candidates.
Right, yeah.
But his consistency, his ability to get after the passer, he's so. I don't think people around the league appreciate how good of a defensive end this dude is. He's been a Pro Bowler 3 years in a row for a reason. I think we all they only traded a 5th-round pick, so you almost all right, well, he's only going to trade for a 5th-round pick. Maybe he's washed now. Maybe something. But he from I know the first couple games maybe he wasn't amazing, but these last 5, 6, 7 weeks, I don't have the numbers in front of me. But those quarterback hits and the pressures and the sacks, he's been one of the best defensemen in the NFL, let alone this team.
Yeah, I think he and Josh Adams are the stories of the second half of the season
totally.
so far. And, he's a guy who's older, and so to see him coming on later is very interesting to me.
I wonder how interested they are in keeping him around here next year.
I'm wondering how long he wants to stay here. He is in his mid-30s, so you do wonder if maybe he's kind of caught up with the grind. He's got other interests outside of football.
His kids.
Yeah, so that'll be interesting because if you look at what happened with Josh Sweat and his ankle injury, if that's a major injury, I talked about it the other day, but they really just have Derek Barnett coming back.
And he's coming off an injury too.
Right, so it's do you want to hold on to him? Maybe you sign him to a short-term extension to kind of beef up his numbers. Chris Long, I thought, got regular pressure. He played pretty well. Haloti Ngata was unnoticeable, which was probably to his benefit.
Timmy Jernigan did not play again.
Ezekiel Elliott's still got a lot of rushing yards.
A lot of them in the first half. They did clamp down a little bit on him in the second half.
I think that was...
he finished with...
113 rushing yards.
Good memory. Yeah,
it's on 28
carries, yeah. But he did have 12 catches for 79 yards, which is a lot. But.
Yeah, I mean, he was heavily involved. I mean, he is their offense.
He is. He's a stud.
So, I thought moving on to that, I thought the linebackers didn't play that well. There were times where Bradham looked like he was lost in coverage or lost on a play. He and Malcolm Jenkins got into a couple of back and forth not arguments, but like, hey, what do I do here? It just kind of seemed like, hey, I think you're in the wrong spot or something.
Tackles is one of those, like, accuracy number misnomers where he had 14 tackles, and that's not necessarily a great thing.
Right, yeah. I mean, I thought Nate Gary played well early. He was like one of the few guys that was making stops.
I mean, Camus had the play that would have changed the game, but it went away.
Yeah.
They were going after him early on in the game, it felt like.
Yeah, they made an example of him.
Yeah.
That was pretty clear.
He's not much. He can't really add much in the passing game.
Yeah, he's not, he's a third linebacker.
Yeah.
And I thought they missed Jordan Hicks in this game, especially from a communication standpoint.
I'm sorry. I wonder if Hicks comes back this year.
I mean, I think he's got to sign a one-year prove-it deal. And
that's what I'm saying. I wonder if he even risks like losing even money on that, and if he just sits out. I mean, the calf was an issue for him last year, and that kind of led to his other injury. He like had said that publicly. So I'm curious if he comes back this year. I'm not quite convinced that Jernigan comes back. I mean, it's possible, but the fact that his back keeps flaring up and he wasn't able to practice this week, or if he did limited, like a day or two. Like, I mean, these are. We haven't talked about it on the podcast yet. Jalen Mills is out for the year. They've lost Ronald Darby. They've lost Derek Barnett. They've lost Rodney McLeod. Is there anyone else on defense I'm missing?
Avonte Maddox has been out.
Avonte Maddox has been out. Maybe he'll be back next week. He was questionable this week. I mean, the injuries to that defense, man, that's insane.
But that really crystallizes it in this game because they actually played very, very well for the first three quarters. And I mean, obviously they were on the field a million plays.
We can talk about the second. Trey Sullivan was around the ball a few times.
Yeah, Trey Sullivan didn't have a bad game. I thought Rasul Douglas, like I said earlier,
that was the best game of his life.
Yeah, I mean, he really played well. Even the final play of the game, I mean, was a really good play. He played it properly. It's just, the earth and the moon and the sun and all that.
And he was making some good tackles, too. He seems like he's really touched up on his tackling form.
He seemed really confident out there. And he was the guy that showed up from the jump. And, Devontae Bosby got beat for that deep throw. Trevon LeBlanc had that one. Mike Gallup. Or no, it was a Cole Beasley.
Yeah.
Beasley.
Let's have a discussion about Sidney Jones real quick.
Okay.
They took a risk drafting him. They knew they were taking a risk drafting him. He was coming off a torn Achilles. The reward, it was like a Sixers-esque draft pick. The reward was, maybe he's probably going to miss the entire rookie year, but this is a guy that was supposed to be a top 10 pick before his injury. He showed some flash of that this season, and then he hurt his hamstring, and then it's been in and out of the lineup. And based on the way this game went, I'm not so sure if he'll be ready for next week. These hamstring things linger. Like, we've seen it with Darren Sproles. We've seen it with him. Seen it with, Corey Graham earlier this year. There's been a few guys. He came back on the field. He was just not ready to be out there, whether it was because of the hamstring or he was thinking about it too much. It's to the point now where I think they have to draft a cornerback.
Yeah, sure.
In April. I'm worried about. He's young, and there's plenty of time to get. But when you're starting your career with this many different injuries and not being able to finish games, it's a bad omen for the future.
So this brings up my favorite draft cornerback prospect of all time, Jason Verrett. Jason Verrett, when he played
can't stay healthy.
When he played and was healthy,
amazing. He
was a top 5 corner, easy. There was no debate. I would beat you in any debate with that. Sidney Jones has the makings of being that type of corner. The problem is he just can't find his footing. No pun intended, with all the injuries.
They're all in his leg regions. Yeah.
I would shut him down for the rest of the year. To me, I want to see what I have in Trevon LeBlanc. I want to see what I have in Rasul Douglas.
See if you need this is because
Rasul Douglas is the starter next year.
You need to decide if you want to try and buy low on Ronald Darby if he's willing to, and you have to see if Jalen Mills is a guy that has a future. His contract's up after next year. So between him and Darby, they're both out now. So you find out if Rasul Douglas is good enough to be a starting cornerback on this team, if Trevon LeBlanc is good enough to be a rotational piece, if Devontae Bosby is worth keeping around. And that's what they're going to try and compete for the playoffs still, obviously, which is why maybe Sidney Jones plays still. But yeah, I mean, I think I agree with you on that.
To me, this is a team, and I've said this to you before, this is a team that on paper to start the year had 4 number 2 corners. They did not have a number 1 corner.
Yeah, that's fair.
They have 4 number 2 corners. Now, you've got to ask yourself, next year, do I want to, Darby could start off on PUP. Sidney Jones is a flight risk, or an injury risk. You don't know what you're getting with him. Do you want to start Rasul Douglas and Jalen Mills on the outside and Crevon LeBlanc in nickel? I think Crevon LeBlanc, look, it's a short-term whatever, but as far as the way he's talked about in the locker room already, what he's put on the field, I think you can feel comfortable with
his personality fits.
Yeah, I think, and he's got a cheap deal next year. He signed a 2-year deal with the Lions. They claimed his contract off of waivers. Yeah. I think that makes sense. You feel comfortable with the nickel position, even if you want to put Sidney Jones back in there, whatever. You've got to figure out what you have in Rasul Douglas, and if he plays like he has the last 2 weeks, you're
then
comfortable
you can feel better, yeah,
with him being the number 2 guy, especially for what Jim Schwartz wants out of his defensive backs. I think, this secondary is going to look different. This defense is going to look different. Rodney McLeod is going to turn out to be the biggest loss of the season.
Yeah. I mean, who would have thought? You and I both were kind of like, overrated. Because you never really heard from him very much. But I think that was by design. He was the guy that was kind of saving those big plays from happening. And I think that's why I'm very interested. I'm assuming they, if not cut him, restructure his deal, but I could see him wanting to stay in Philly if they want to keep him around.
He's been around every single
He's
road
around
game.
all the time. I mean, he's a big part. He's a leader he's been a leader on this team, and he's going to be. They have a lot of interesting. This roster could look very different next year, or they could get a bunch of guys to take cheaper deals, and it looks the same. I don't know.
Yeah, and he shares the same birthday as me. Fun fact.
Oh boy! All right,
23rd.
Let's wrap up real quick
before we do that, I want to touch on somebody who's very important, who we've criticized quite a bit. Corey Graham.
Oh, good call. Yeah.
Corey Graham has played a lot better over the last 3 games. Coincidentally, the Eagles are 2-1 during that stretch. This game, he made a huge play.
The interception.
I call it the baby Patrick Robinson. The interception that set Carson Wentz up for that first touchdown really kind of changed the trajectory of the game in a lot of ways. He's been criticized for his mental errors and his poor tackling. In this game, he tackled very well, and he made a couple of really big mental what's the opposite of mental errors? Mental
achievements.
Mental achievements. Okay, there you go.
Achievement unlocked.
We've got to talk about specialists. Sorry,
I was about to say that's where we're going to wrap it up on.
Yeah.
Do your Cameron Johnson
Cameron
spiel.
Johnson, you ready? So he punted.
You have to say it in an Australian accent.
It wasn't just the. I can't even do it. See how bad that was? We have fun.
You tried though. I appreciate that. I appreciate at the No Huddle Show.
At the No Huddle Show. I forgot the name of the show for a second. My bad.
You went Australian and
I got Cam Johnson on the brain.
On the Bobby.
So Cam had a very good game, but not just him. The punt coverage team, and that's become a strength for this team this season. Shout out to Dave Phipp because he's had 50 gajillion different players there with all the injuries. Anyway, Johnson kicked or punted 6 times for 276 yards. That's a 46-yard average. But what's impressive about that is they had a 43.5 net yardage on coverage. That's a difference of 2.5 yards. So you're not really allowing returners to really do anything in the punt game. He had 3 punts down within the 20. That's impressive. He's had an impressive year. If you want to read about him, search my name and then search.
All right, Jake Elliott, LVP of today, least valuable player.
It's a shame because
he's been really good lately.
You know what? I think it got into his head that somebody kicked a longer field goal than he did. Brett Maher.
It was a
62-yard. And then Jake hit a 61-yard last year.
He missed he made his field goal today, but he missed an extra point, and they went into overtime. So
one point makes the difference.
It does.
It saves you from going to overtime,
Man.
And then you don't have to ask Doug Peterson about going for 2.
Yeah, and which is weird. These questions didn't have to come last year. This is so weird. It's a weird season. So next week they're in LA against the Rams. It's Carson Wentz. If the season's over, this is Carson Wentz's redemption potential. He's been overthinking a lot of stuff, I think, when you see him out there, and we're gonna kind of find out what he's made of even more next week in a way.
And that's why I haven't killed the season yet, because I do think you look at Carolina. Carolina lost today. The Vikings play the Seahawks on Monday, and the Seahawks look like they're in position to beat the bricks off the Vikings. So if those two teams fall apart down the stretch, the Eagles have an opportunity if they do win out.
They don't have the tiebreaker, though, so
do
they have
not
to
have the
finish
tie-
ahead of them, which is a factor.
Right, but we're betting on Carson, right? And so I think with Carson, he's been so good at times that you want to keep believing, and I think that's why the fan base gives him such a long leash. If Carson turns it around and comes out like, a bat out of hell because, the Rams are who cost him his Super Bowl run, maybe that's more of a media creation for us, or maybe that's a fan creation, whatever. Let's say he comes out and lights the world on fire and they beat the Rams and upset the Rams.
Then you're feeling a little different.
Then you're feeling really good. You go home against the Texans, and then you play the Redskins, who are starting Josh Johnson probably for the rest of the season, which is the funniest thing I've ever heard. Anyway, let's wrap it up on that.
All right, we'll wrap it up on that. We'll be back again later this week talking about the Rams game and whatever else happens this week. Thanks for listening, guys. Leave some comments, write some reviews. We're on all the podcast apps, and thanks for listening. This episode of the No Huddle Show was brought to you by Chevrolet Cadillac of Turnersville, a Penske automotive dealer. Visit today at the Route 42 location in Turnersville, New Jersey, or online at ChevroletofTurnersville.com and CadillacofTurnersville.com.